more specifically Netflix adult animation. Netflix went from being a DVD distribution service to a massive presence in entertainment, dominating cable in recent years. It's now its very own production company producing original content, as well as being one of the main places people go to watch TV in general. Netflix is giant, and we all know this, but sometimes I forget that most people nowadays use Netflix or streaming services as their mainstream way of watching adult animated shows. Long gone are the days when Fox, Adult Swim, Comedy Central, and TBS served as the biggest representatives for the medium. As the rise of streaming has provided newer titles, some having a wider appeal, but also a lot of titles that simply would not have worked on television and can only work on streaming, especially when it comes to Netflix in particular. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at Netflix's catalog of adult animation, running through some of the well-known titles, and asking the biggest question of all, are these shows pushing adult animation in a better direction? Real quick guys, I just want to give a quick thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. ExpressVPN is an incredible service that enables unrestricted access to all parts of the internet while keeping you safe and secure. With forces like hackers, spyware, and slow internet speeds breathing down your neck, ExpressVPN is able to encrypt and hide your IP address, making it look like you're in a different part of the world, preventing hackers from creeping in and stealing your information when you're connected to unencrypted networks like at airports, hotels, and coffee shops. It's super easy. All it takes is a literal press of a button and can be accessed on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Something that I love about ExpressVPN actually comes in handy now more than ever. It gives you way more shows and movies on streaming. Case in point, if I change my VPN location to the UK, suddenly I have Rick and Morty and Final Space. That is not in America. Even with YouTube, sometimes videos are region locked, and ExpressVPN allows me to bypass that with no hassle. ExpressVPN is the fastest VPN on the market, with glowing reviews, 24/7 customer service, and easy access. And you can get 3 months free with a 12-month plan only by clicking this link in the description. expressvpn.com/theroundtable. Again, this free 3 months is in addition to the 12-month plan at expressvpn.com/theroundtable. Take back your internet privacy today. And we can't talk about Netflix animation without talking about their biggest success story, BoJack Horseman.
What have you been doing since the show's cancellation 18 years ago?
That's a great question, Charlie.
Step back from the title of adult animation, okay? BoJack Horseman is one of the most important television series of all time, period. I would argue that it stands with the greats and has a place in history. Especially since the show ended, it is now solidified and can start becoming part of cartoon history in general. The show about a washed-up sitcom horse trying to maintain relevancy in current-day Hollywood and pop culture does not sound like a success story on paper, but it's just so weird that it worked. And BoJack Horseman now stands as one of the most beloved and notable faces of modern adult animation. It stands for what animation can look like in our current age, and it pushed the boundaries so far for other shows to follow in. I mean, there's so much to say about BoJack, I don't even know where to start.
Chapter 1.
The reason it works so well is because it managed to hit that sweet spot between critical and commercial success. And it wasn't a hit right away. It may be one of the most successful early Netflix originals, but I only heard of BoJack through word of mouth. And that's because the show is just that good. It got people talking. Netflix recommended it to me and I thought it looked stupid. This is like back in 2013. Now we're living in a post-BoJack world, and it changed a lot of things. BoJack managed to get more successful every year, as every season added to the last, becoming darker and more emotionally complex as the show went on, telling complicated human stories that they couldn't dream of pulling off in the beginning of the show's run. BoJack didn't just stagnate with all of its season renewals, it challenged itself on where it could go and what it could talk about, making it not only an extremely cathartic watch, but also an incredibly difficult one. As you watch BoJack get worse and better and worse and better, along with the people around him all developing their own lives. Not to mention the fact that the premise of a critique on Hollywood and celebrity culture ended up being the most relevant thing they could possibly talk about, as the show aired right alongside things like the Me Too movement and all of the other massive changes that have been happening in Hollywood since it premiered.
Wait, so I'm not in the movie at all?
Well, yeah, not technically, but Computer You is giving the performance of your career.
BoJack became a mouthpiece for those things. It became one of the most important shows in that aspect. And that's because it handled these issues and its satire on them extremely well. So there's more than enough reasons to watch BoJack if you haven't. And it started adult animation strong on Netflix, paving the road for other shows to follow, like Tuca and Birdie, even though Netflix canceled that technically. They also canceled BoJack too, in a move that surprised a lot of people. I'm not here to debate whether BoJack ended too soon or too early. In my opinion, I'm glad the series had a definite end and didn't just trail on forever. But there's even talks of a spin-off happening right now, so I'm not sure what's gonna happen. But BoJack is only as strong as its individual parts, and that's why this show is gonna have such a legacy. BoJack's crew. The alumni from the show will and already are going off and making incredible things. Tuca and Birdie is just the start. There will never be another show like BoJack, period, but the talented people that worked on the show will go and shape television as a whole for years to come. And that's why it's so impactful. It also proved as a pretty big deal because it managed to cross the streaming line and even aired on Comedy Central for a little bit, proving that streaming original shows have what it takes to stand up with the big boys on primetime television. If you somehow have missed BoJack, you definitely should watch it, and you probably will at some point. It is a critical darling and will be remembered for generations to come, and it changed what adult animation could talk about and what it could look like. BoJack wasn't always funny, it wasn't always happy, but most importantly, it wasn't always offensive. It didn't handle adult problems, it handled human problems. Homer Simpson's a funny alcoholic. BoJack's a real alcoholic, and that's a lot harder to watch. It's just crazy that a show about a talking horse ended up showing us the most about ourselves.
Hey guys, I'm sorry you kids had to see that.
Yeah, that was really f***ed up.
And it's gonna hurt for a while. But here's how you deal with it. You just shove it down. Keep shoving till it goes away.
But his face was...
I know, princess, just keep shoving.
We'll take you for ice cream.
Look, if you're a fan of stand-up, chances are you know Bill Burr. He has a pretty distinct voice, but you may not be as familiar with his original series, the Netflix animated sitcom F is for Family. This is a unique take on the dysfunctional family dynamic and focuses on Frank Murphy, a Vietnam vet father, trying to raise his children during the 70s. Now, I am a huge Bill Burr fan, but when I first saw F is for Family, I wasn't too excited about it. It kind of looked average. But boy, was I wrong. Because as I watched the show, I realized that it wasn't just strictly a comedy, it was borderline a family drama. It handled real issues and got dark in a lot of really deep ways. Frank's entire character is rooted in disappointment. His life is not what he wanted it to be. He's not really happy living the suburban life. Same with his wife. The whole premise is based on the fact that they kind of feel like they fell into this role and they're dealing with it. But they go into that so much more complexly than I ever thought they would. Watching these shows, I literally fell in love with these characters and I started to really care about them as I watched the show go into places that I never imagined that it would. Without spoiling anything, it gets pretty dark sometimes. There's some deaths, people die, and it proves what streaming has the advantage of: overarching narratives. F is for Family can afford to tell a story over the course of multiple episodes because the average viewer is going to binge it anyways. It's sort of like a movie segmented out. Luckily, F is for Family has had a lot of success and currently just aired its 4th season with word out on whether or not they're going to renew it for a 5th. But Netflix supporting this show allowed for the show to get better every season. The characters growing more complicated, side characters getting their own storylines and becoming more interesting. Like their neighbor. He started off kind of as a joke, he's so perfect, but later we see the reality of his life, his drug addictions, all the things I hinted on before in a comedic tone, they were able to go back and develop in an all too real way. TLDR, F is for Family is a lot deeper than you think and definitely worth a watch. Moving on to more recent animation though, Netflix hit us with their best cartoon yet, The Midnight Gospel. This is where streaming originals and Netflix in particular really shines. Nowhere else would something like The Midnight Gospel get greenlit or even be successful. This show is weird. Sure, it has pretty big names attached to it, like Pendleton Ward of Adventure Time fame, but everything about the show is just perfect for the streaming generation. And it is the most unique show to come out of Netflix or animation in general, hands down. Simply put, The Midnight Gospel is a surreal animated podcast interview show where they take clips from the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast and animate crazy scenarios behind it. That's literally how it started. Duncan Trussell is a comedian and podcaster, probably most famous for the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, was friends with Pendleton Ward and they knew they wanted to work on a project together, and it literally happened when he took one of the episodes of his podcast and animated a zombie apocalypse over it, which ended up being the first episode of the show. The rest is history, and the product is one of the trippiest things of all time. First of all, The Midnight Gospel is eye candy all the way through. It's beautiful in every sense of the word, but it's just so incredibly unique. Every episode is a riveting conversation about life or drugs or death, paired with equally insane animation that has nothing to do with the topic at hand, but tells its own self-contained adventure. Basically, there is a verbal story you can follow, or a visual story you can follow. A great example would be the first episode where they talk about the legalization of drugs while you watch them survive a zombie apocalypse. Now, I can't tell if these were all taken directly from the podcast or if they had people ADR lines, because some of the lines fit the scenario too well.
And so we follow the sweetness down.
Is she in labor?
Yeah, she's like...
Okay, all right, okay.
But either way, a majority of this is just their arbitrary conversations being animated to a completely different scenario, and it always works. Not only that, but this seemingly one-off show still managed somehow to have an overarching plot. focusing on Clancy neglecting his responsibilities and alluding to a deeper family problem. In fact, one of my favorite episodes of the season has to be the one with no interview, where Clancy is trying to fix his universe simulator. Their creative way of explaining how he's talking to all these different people and all these different worlds every episode. If you're a procrastinator or somebody who neglects looming problems, like me, then you will relate to this story so much, and every episode will leave you in awe. You'll often find yourself juggling between paying attention to the conversation or getting lost in the visuals. And often I found myself tuning back into one or the other and finding them in a completely different place than they were when I tuned out. And this is one of the few shows that has basically unlimited rewatch potential, because every time I rewatch one of these episodes, I understand it a little bit more and I see so much more than I did the first time. The episodes range from funny to deep to emotionally moving. Like the final episode, which included an interview Duncan had with his now dead mother, recorded before she died. You will cry.
There's no way to stop the heartbreak. What do you do about that?
You cry. You cry.
All this leads up into a perfect, ambiguous ending. This season is just airtight perfect. Now, The Midnight Gospel isn't a massive show right now, but it's growing a pretty dedicated fan base. Right now, most of its fan base seems to be the stoner crowd and the YouTube lo-fi crowd. I'm sure there's an overlap there. A lot of people that watch the Joe Rogan podcast, but I love them all, and hopefully they love this show. My favorite thing is just putting it on for somebody who has no idea what to expect, because they're always entertained and they're always blown away. It has that power. Season 2 is not yet confirmed, okay, but it's definitely demanded. And even if it doesn't, this season does more than enough to deserve a watch. Even if you're not the biggest fan of animation, you can literally listen to it and be just as interested. It's one of the most unique and hard to explain cartoons that I've seen in such a long time. If you haven't seen The Midnight Gospel, you're missing out. Next up, the Netflix original with the most clout in my opinion is Disenchantment, as this is a Matt Groening original. I knew this was going to be a big deal when they announced it, and it's definitely a big deal for Netflix. I mean, this is Matt Groening. He created the biggest cartoon, often regarded as the greatest television show of all time, though you can debate that. Do it in the comments, be nice. Now, honestly, out of all of Matt Groening's massive hits, this is the show I've definitely seen the least of, but that's definitely my fault as it has so much going for it. This show, a parody take on fairy tales, follows Bean, an alcoholic princess, traveling with her naive partner Elfo, and her personal demon Lucy, voiced by the infamous Eric Andre, arguably my favorite part of the show. It's so weird to see Eric Andre doing a normal role. I haven't seen it all the way through, but from what I've seen, I've loved. That show has that classic sharp wit and clever writing, and without spoilers, does have the luxury of an ongoing story, something that The Simpsons and Futurama don't innately have. It's cool that he's trying something different, and is very much made to be on streaming. It's serialized adult animation that's still a comedy before anything else. Although there are still other serialized shows like BoJack, it's still arguably grounded in conflict most viewers would find interesting, the hardships and morality of those in the entertainment industry. Disenchantment, on the other hand, is in a fantasy setting that innately makes it a lot less grounded than most of these shows, which may have affected its success. I mean, if you're not into fantasy, you would immediately write this show off. That's why I feel like it hasn't found a massive audience as of now. Fantasy still feels pretty stigmatized to me as a genre, more so than sci-fi or the classic American sitcom. Still, it's clear that a lot of passion and work is being put into Disenchantment that makes it worth a watch. And it's been renewed, so it's definitely doing well financially. Hopefully that's not just off Groening's name alone and the show itself. It's sad because I don't see enough people talking about it, including myself. I'm guilty of this. It doesn't get brought up a lot in the overall conversation of adult animation right now, though I feel like it deserves to be. It's funny and unique, and if you have a Netflix subscription, definitely worth a watch. If given the opportunity, I would gush about Love, Death, and Robots until I physically could not talk anymore. This has been the most exciting thing in animation, in my opinion, to come out in years, and although it has been successful and a lot of people have been talking about it, I feel like it deserves so much more. In my opinion, it's at least the most underrated cartoon on Netflix. If you've never seen or heard about Love, Death, and Robots, this dark and brutal animated anthology series is a breath of fresh air. Every episode follows a different premise in a different universe, a different story, and a different animation style. That's why it's so hard to talk about broadly, because every episode is so different from the next. It's a grab bag full of beautiful animation. And sure, the episodes aren't always perfect, but they're always interesting. Some of them are straight up masterpieces. These episodes range from space farmers in mech suits, to robots investigating post-apocalyptic Earth, to Topher Grace looking in his freezer. Yes, that's real.
The reason that bad things happen to you is because you're a dumbass.
And they're not always dark. Some episodes are about yogurt taking over, but they have that deep-rooted sci-fi vibe that always gives me the chills in a way that I can't explain. They're always kind of freaky, and when the show wants to be dark, they